let's see how to use the database functions. For example, you downloaded Apple's monthly stock prices from September 2001 to September 2014. Your supervisor asks you to find out what is the average monthly return and standard deviation for Apple in the year 2005. Instead of having to manually crop out the 2005 data from this database and then perform analysis on them, you could use the database functions in Excel to quickly finish this task. Well, the first step is to complete your database in order to perform this task. Since you are only interested in the 2005 stock returns, you will first compute what is the monthly stock return based on the monthly stock prices you downloaded from the database. How do you compute returns? There are two different ways. You can either compute log returns or percentage returns. To compute log returns, you will use log up on today's price divided by the previous price. Okay. Once you compute the log, you can also compute percentage returns. Percentage returns can be computed using today's price minus previous price divided by previous price. If our time interval is small enough, then percentage return will gradually converge to log return. So in this case, it doesn't really matter which return measure we use. Let's just use log return for simplicity's sake. So log of today's price divided by previous price, that gives you the monthly return for October of 2001. So once you compute the first return, you can use the fill handle option in Excel to quickly fill out the remainder of the column. So what you're going to do is you're going to move your cursor to the lower right-hand side of the cell, double click on it. That will copy down the formula automatically until the very last row of the database. So again, you can use fill handle again to trying to compute what is the year stamp for each of the observation in the database. Okay, you use the year formula to extract out what is the year for each of the observations in the data set, and then you move the cursor to the lower right-hand side of the cell and double click on it, and that will fill handle the rest of the column for you. Okay, once you have completed your database, the next task is to create your filtering criteria. So you can limit the scope of each of the variables in your database. So how do you do that? The best way that I have found is to simply copy over the header in the data of your database and paste it onto a blank spot exactly. So the header in your filtering criteria will match the header in your database exactly. Okay, so once you copy over the header, now you can start to filter out each of the variable in your filtering criteria. For example, you can limit the scope for date. You can limit the scope for your stock prices, returns, and year. So for our exercise, we only want to limit the scope for year to 2005. Okay, once we have created the filtering criteria, we can now use the database function to compute what is the monthly average and standard deviation for Apple's stock returns in 2005. So to compute average monthly return, you use the average. The first argument is database. So for the first argument, you have to select the entire database from including the header and all the way to the bottom of the database. And the second argument, oops, let's do it again. Okay, select the entire database from beginning to the end and comma. Now you can just move your cursor up to select the second criteria. Second criteria is field. Field is in reference to what is the column number for the column that you want to analyze on in your database. So the column that we want to analyze on is the return column. Return column is arranged in the third column in the database. you count from the left to right. So the first column is date, the second column is price, and third column is return. So the field number for return is 3. Now the third criteria is criteria. Criteria is in reference to what is your filtering criteria. So you will select the filtering criteria, including the header, and close, and okay, let's do it again, and close the parentheses. Okay, this way the database function will compute what is the average monthly return based on your database for 2005 information. Okay, so the information, the result is 0.92%. That means the monthly stock return for Apple in 2005 is 0.92%. Now let's compute what is the standard deviation, monthly standard deviation for Apple in 2005. Again, we will use the database function, and database function for this is distanddiv. Okay, the first argument is database, so you will select the database again, including the header, comma, and move your cursor up. And then again, you want to compute what is the standard deviation based on the returns, and that's in column 3 in the database. And criteria is listed here. Okay. Close the parentheses and enter. So now you have the standard deviation, the monthly standard deviation for Apple in 2005. Okay, you are wondering if your supervisor is going to ask you what is the monthly stock return standard deviation for any other years. In order to quickly find out the answer for other years, you can do a one-dimensional database. So I have the one-dimensional database created here. So since the time frame for our for this exercise is from 2001 to 2014, so I will list all the years here in order to compute what is the monthly average return and standard deviation for each year. Okay, so previously I have created a base case for this database. And that is what is the monthly stock return and standard deviation for 2005. And now in order to create a database, in order to run simulation on that base case, we'll create a link for the output variable between the base case and our data table. And for the average, the number in the base case is I6, enter. And for the standard deviation, the base case number is saved in I7. Okay, you see those two numbers are hidden because I used semicolon to hide those numbers. The next step is to select all the input variables and output variables so you can run the one-dimensional database. So you select all the information you need and go to the data tab in the ribbon. Click on what if analysis, data table. And since this is only one-dimensional and the input variable is saved in the column, so you only have to input the column input cell. The column input cell is year. In the base case, the year is saved here in J4. Click enter and OK. Now you have computed a table that displays what is the average monthly return and standard deviation for each of the year from 2001 until 2014. You can even do a quick plot based on the average return and standard deviation on a year-to-year basis. So this way your reader can more clearly visualize how the monthly return and standard deviation changes from year to year.